Everyone who knows anything about World War II knows one thing about the Tiger tank. It was the most feared weapon on the battlefield. Allied soldiers dreaded it. Commanders built entire strategies around avoiding it. British field reports from North Africa in 1943 described Tiger fear, a psychological paralysis where Allied tank crews refused to advance because they suspected a Tiger might be present, even when none was. A single Tiger could roll into a formation of enemy tanks and come out the other side intact. In one documented engagement in France in 1944, SS officer Michael Wittmann, arguably the most decorated Tiger commander of the war, attacked a column of the British 7th Armoured Division near Villers-Bocage with a single Tiger. He destroyed 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns in under 15 minutes before withdrawing. And yet, Germany lost the war. Not just lost it, was completely, utterly crushed, invaded from the west, the east, and the south simultaneously. Its cities bombed to rubble, its army surrounded and captured in groups of hundreds of thousands, its government dissolved, its territory occupied, its military ceased to exist, and the Tiger tank, the weapon that was supposed to be unstoppable, played a significant role in that defeat. Not because it was weak, because it was too strong in all the wrong ways. This is the story of the most over-engineered weapon in military history, a machine that won almost every individual battle it entered and helped Germany lose the war. Before we get into the Tiger itself, we need to understand why this story matters far beyond 1942. Every military in the world today faces the exact same question Germany faced. Do you build the best possible weapon, or do you build enough weapons to win? It sounds like an easy question. The answer, most people assume, is obviously build the best. But the Tiger tank story proves why that assumption is almost always wrong. The United States spent over $60 billion developing and procuring the F-22 Raptor, widely considered the best fighter jet ever built, with stealth capability, supercruise, and avionics so advanced they remain classified decades later. Total AF-22s produced 187. China, in the same period, produced over 1,500 fourth-generation fighters. Not as advanced, but 8 times as many. The F-35 program, America's next attempt, has cost over $400 billion in development and produced fighters at a price of roughly $100 million each. The debate about whether that's the right approach versus producing more, cheaper aircraft is active right now in Pentagon budget hearings. The question Germany got catastrophically wrong in 1942 is still being argued in defense ministries around the world today. The Tiger tank is the clearest, most dramatic, most thoroughly documented case study in history of what happens when you prioritize perfection over sufficiency. Understanding it doesn't just explain why Germany lost World War II. It explains a fundamental principle of war that predates gunpowder and will remain true as long as nations fight each other. The Tiger one, officially the Panzerkampfwagen 6, entered combat service in August 1942. The location was near Leningrad on the Eastern Front, though that first deployment was a disaster we'll get to shortly. To understand why the Tiger terrified Allied crews, you need to understand what it was actually capable of, because the numbers are genuinely extraordinary. The main armament was the 88mm KWK-36 cannon. This gun had its origins in Germany's Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun, a weapon already feared for its ability to destroy Allied bombers at altitude. Adapted for tank use and firing an armor-piercing round at a muzzle velocity of 773 meters per second, it was accurate and lethal at ranges that seemed almost impossible in 1942. Tiger crews were trained to engage at 800 to 1,200 meters. Against Soviet T-34s, they were achieving consistent kills at 1,500 meters. In favorable conditions with experienced crews, engagements at 2,000 meters were documented. For context, most tank battles in World War II happened at under 500 meters. because at greater distances the accuracy of most tank guns dropped off severely, and because the psychological pressure on crews in combat made precision aim difficult. The Tiger didn't have that problem. Its gun was accurate. Its optics, the Zeiss TZF-9B, were exceptional, producing a clear image at range that Allied optics of the period couldn't match. The protection was equally remarkable. The front hull armor was 100 millimeters thick. The gun mantlet, the armored cover around the gun on the turret front, was 100 to 110 millimeters. The turret sides were 80 millimeters. The hull sides, 80 millimeters. The rear, 80 millimeters. These numbers meant that in 1942 and early 1943, almost nothing in the Allied arsenal could reliably penetrate the Tiger's front armor at combat ranges. The Soviet 76mm F-34 gun on the T-34, the standard Soviet tank gun through 1943, could penetrate the Tiger's side armor at under 200 meters. The front, essentially immune at all practical combat ranges. The American 75mm M3 gun on the M4 Sherman had similar limitations. U.S. Army tests showed the Sherman's gun could penetrate the Tiger's side at around 100 meters, but the front hull was beyond it. The British 6-pounder, their standard anti-tank gun in 1942, could penetrate the Tiger's side at medium range, not the front. In practical terms, to kill a Tiger in 1942 or early 1943, Allied crews had to get shots into the sides or rear, which meant flanking maneuvers under fire, or use indirect methods like artillery, air attack, or mines. The result was the kill ratio that became part of Tiger legend. Post-war analysis using German records and Allied after-action reports produced an overall Tiger kill ratio of approximately 5.74 Allied tanks destroyed per Tiger lost. This varied enormously by engagement and commander. Some Tiger aces achieved ratios far higher. Some poorly led engagements were less favorable. But 5-to-1 as an overall figure is well supported by the evidence. That ratio sounds decisive. It sounds like something that should win wars. So, what went wrong? Here is the number that changes everything about how you think about the Tiger tank. From August 1942, when the first Tiger entered combat, to May 1945, when Germany surrendered, the total number of Tiger I tanks produced was 1,347. 1,347. That is the complete Tiger production run for the entire war. In the same period, the United States produced 49,234 M4 Sherman tanks. The Soviet Union produced more T-34s in 1944 alone, a single year, than Germany produced Tigers in the entire war. Soviet T-34 production in 1944. Approximately 14,648 vehicles. German Tiger production across all 3 years, 1,347. To put this in direct ratio, for every Tiger Germany produced during the entire war, the Allies produced roughly 80 tanks. Not 8, 80. Why couldn't Germany build more? The answer lies in the physics of what the Tiger was. The Tiger I weighed 54 metric tons, a T-34 weighed 26 tons, an M4 Sherman weighed approximately 30 tons. The Tiger was more than twice the weight of the tank that would become the backbone of the force that defeated Germany. That weight came from somewhere, armor and the massive mechanical systems needed to move it, and those systems drove the production difficulty. Building one Tiger, one required approximately 300,000 man-hours of skilled labor, machinists, welders, engineers, who are simultaneously needed for aircraft production, artillery production, submarine construction, and all the other demands of Germany's war economy. A Sherman required approximately 10,000 man-hours. A T-34 required roughly 8,000. The Tiger required 30 times the skilled labor of a Sherman, in a war economy already strained past its limits. The Henschel facility in Kassel, was the primary Tiger manufacturer. At absolute peak operational capacity, before Allied bombing, before material shortages, before workforce disruptions, Henschel could produce 25 Tigers per month. In months with any disruption, that number fell to 15 or fewer. The Ford plant in Highland Park, Michigan, was producing over 1,000 tanks per month. One American factory, not running at maximum capacity, was producing more tanks in a month than Henschel could produce in 3 years. German Armaments Minister Albert Speer, who oversaw German war production from 1942 onward, calculated in his post-war memoir that the raw materials, skilled labor, and factory capacity consumed by one Tiger could have produced 3 to 4 Panzer IV tanks. The Panzer IV was not as impressive as the Tiger. Its 75mm gun was less powerful, its armor thinner. But it was effective, mechanically reliable, and could be produced in quantities that might actually have influenced the war's outcome. Germany had made a fundamental mistake, optimizing for the performance of individual vehicles rather than for the total combat power those vehicles could deliver. But production was only half the problem. What happened to Tigers after they were built was equally disastrous. A tank that isn't running is a very expensive obstacle. The Tiger I was mechanically the most complex vehicle Germany attempted to operate at scale during World War II, and Germany's logistics system was never capable of supporting it properly. Start with the engine. The Tiger used the Maybach HL 230, a 700 horsepower, 23-liter V12 gasoline engine. For comparison, the Sherman's Ford GAA engine produced 500 horsepower in a tank weighing 24 tons less. The Maybach was moving 54 tons with 700 horsepower, meaning it was always operating at or near its designed limits. There was no margin for the kind of hard use that combat inevitably produces. Overheating was endemic. The Tiger's engine compartment was not well ventilated for the demands placed on it, particularly in the dusty conditions of the Eastern Front or the heat of North Africa. Engine fires were a documented and feared failure mode. The transmission, the Maybach Olvar 8-speed pre-selector gearbox, was sophisticated for 1942, mechanically elegant and fragile under the stress of 54 tons of tank on rough terrain. Transmission failures were common enough that Tiger units were instructed to carry spare components wherever possible. When a transmission failed in the field, which it frequently did, repair required trained technicians and parts that had to come from Germany. The fuel consumption was staggering and strategically limiting. The Tiger I burned approximately 8 liters of fuel per kilometer on good roads. Cross-country, on the rutted tracks, mud, and rough terrain of the Eastern Front, consumption rose to 12 to 15 liters per kilometer. The fuel tanks held 540 liters, giving a road range of around 140 kilometers. Cross-country range, under 60 kilometers before refueling was necessary. For a tank operating in Russia, where front lines moved rapidly, supply lines were stretched over hundreds of kilometers, and fuel was already a strategic scarcity. A cross-country range of 60 kilometers was a severe operational constraint. Tiger units frequently had to be resupplied by fuel truck in the middle of operations, an obvious vulnerability that Allied air power and partisan activity did exploit. Then there was the track system, one of the Tiger's most notorious engineering complications. The Tiger used an interleaved road wheel arrangement, multiple rows of wheels overlapping each other in a complex pattern. In theory, this distributed the tank's weight effectively across soft ground, reducing ground pressure to manageable levels despite the massive weight. In practice, on the Eastern Front, mud and debris packed between the overlapping wheels constantly. In winter, that mud froze solid overnight. Tiger crews in Russia spent hours every morning with pickaxes and blowtorches trying to free their frozen tracks before the day's operations could begin. Crews that failed to do this, or whose tracks froze too solid to free, had immobilized vehicles that became targets. Several Tigers were captured or destroyed not by enemy action, but because their tracks froze overnight and they couldn't move by the time enemy forces arrived. The track width problem compounded everything. The Tiger's combat tracks were 725 millimeters wide, necessary to distribute the tank's weight on soft ground. But these tracks were too wide for standard German railway flat cars. Every time a Tiger unit needed to move by rail, which was frequent because self-propelled movement consumed enormous quantities of irreplaceable fuel, the crews had to swap to narrow 520mm transport tracks and remove the outer road wheel assemblies. This process took 4 to 6 hours. Reversing it at the destination took another 4 to 6 hours. Every rail movement of a Tiger unit was half a day of manual labor before a single tank could fight. The mechanical breakdown rate was the consequence of all these factors combined. German records from the Eastern Front document that at any given time between 30 and 50% of Tiger tanks in a unit were non-operational due to mechanical issues. Not battle damage, mechanical failure. During active operations, the non-operational rate sometimes exceeded 50%. After the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, after-action reports from German heavy tank units showed that a substantial fraction of their losses were not from enemy fire, but from vehicles that broke down and had to be destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. The Allied experience with the Sherman was fundamentally different. The Sherman's engine was simple, understood by American mechanics who had worked on similar engines in civilian life and could be replaced in the field in approximately 4 hours using standard tools. Spare parts were standardized across variants and available at supply points within a tactically reasonable distance. When a Sherman broke down, it was frequently repaired and returned to service within hours. When a Tiger broke down, it often waited days for specialized parts and technicians. In a fluid front, days was often equivalent to abandonment. Even setting aside the production and maintenance problems, Germany consistently failed to use Tigers in ways that maximized whatever advantages they possessed. The pattern began with the very first Tiger combat deployment. In September 1942, 4 Tigerais were committed to an assault near Leningrad. The terrain was swampy, heavily forested, and thoroughly unsuitable for heavy tank operations. Exactly the environment where a 54-ton tank's weight became a liability rather than an asset. 3 of the 4 Tigers broke down in the soft ground. The 4th was immobilized and eventually abandoned. Germany had revealed its secret weapon to Soviet intelligence, who quickly sent engineers to examine the abandoned Tiger and gained nothing. Hitler was personally invested in the Tiger program. He had pushed for heavy tank development as far back as 1941, and he wanted results that justified that investment. The result was a pattern of premature, piecemeal commitment. Tigers were sent to critical areas of the front in small numbers, used as propaganda, used to stabilize local crises, used in terrain and circumstances where their characteristics were liabilities rather than assets. The correct doctrine for a heavy tank was concentration. Mass Tigers together in dedicated Schwerpanzerabteilungen, the heavy tank battalions, 40 or more vehicles, with full infantry and artillery support, punching through enemy lines at a single decisive point where the breakthrough could be exploited. This happened occasionally. At Kursk in July 1943, the SS Panzer Corps used Tigers in this fashion during the initial assault, achieving significant local success in penetrating Soviet defensive lines. But Kursk also illustrates the strategic problem. Germany was already in a position where local tactical success couldn't be translated into strategic victory. Even when the Tigers worked as intended, Germany no longer had the reserves, the fuel, or the strategic position to exploit the breakthroughs. After Kursk, German armor was increasingly used defensively, the worst possible role for the Tiger. An offensive weapon used defensively, in small groups to plug gaps in a crumbling line, was almost never in the right terrain, at the right numbers, with the right support to be effective. Now, if the Tiger I represents a catastrophic miscalculation, the Tiger II, the Panzerkampfwagen Tiger aus FB, known to Allied troops as the King Tiger, represents that miscalculation doubled down on with full conviction. Introduced in mid-1944, the King Tiger weighed 68.5 metric tons. Its frontal hull armor was 150 millimeters sloped at 50 degrees, a combination that made it essentially impervious to any weapon the Allies fielded in 1944 at normal combat ranges. Its long 88mm KWK-43L/71 gun could destroy any Allied tank in service at ranges exceeding 2,500 meters. Total King Tiger production, 489 tanks. For the last year of the war, each King Tiger consumed resources that could have produced multiple Panzer IVs that were actually sufficient for Germany's defensive strategy. The King Tiger was so heavy that its Maybach engine, already strained in the Tiger I at 54 tons, was simply inadequate at 68.5 tons. Overheating failures were more frequent. The transmission broke down more often. The cross-country range was worse. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provides the sharpest illustration. The 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, equipped with King Tigers, was committed to the German offensive. Of the approximately 45 King Tigers deployed, more than half were lost before reaching the front line. Not to American tank fire, to mechanical breakdown, fuel exhaustion, or both. Vehicles that ran out of fuel were pushed to the roadside and abandoned. There was no recovery equipment capable of moving a 68-ton tank, and no fuel to fill it if there had been. Germany in December 1944 was building 69-ton tanks in a war where it had run out of fuel to move them. The war was not won by the best tank. It was won by enough tanks. The M4 Sherman is still criticized by military history enthusiasts, accurately in narrow technical terms, as inferior to the Tiger. In a one-on-one engagement, Tiger wins. The data on this is clear. In Tunisia, Normandy, and the Rhineland, American tank crews knew that meeting a Tiger head-on was a losing proposition and planned around it. But the Sherman was never meant to win one-on-one fights against Tigers. It was meant to defeat Germany, and it did. The Sherman was designed to the following specification. It had to be buildable in automobile factories by assembly line workers with 6 months of training. It had to be transportable on standard rail systems without modification. It had to cross standard military bridges. It had to be maintainable by a draftee mechanic with standard tools. It had to have parts interchangeable across its many production variants. Every one of those requirements made the Sherman less impressive in individual combat. Every one of those requirements made it possible to produce 49,234 of them. Ford, Chrysler, Fisher Body, Pacific Car and Foundry, American Locomotive Company, Baldwin Locomotive Works, Detroit Tank Arsenal. Companies that in 1941 were building automobiles and railroad equipment converted their facilities and began mass-producing tanks within months. The Detroit Tank Arsenal alone, built from scratch and operational by mid-1941, was producing Shermans at a rate that Germany's entire Tiger program could never approach. When a Sherman was destroyed, and many thousands were, it could be replaced within weeks. When a Tiger was destroyed, it consumed 300,000 man-hours to replace. Those are not comparable losses. The Soviet experience makes the same point even more starkly. The T-34/85, introduced in early 1944 with a new 85mm gun that could penetrate Tiger armor at realistic combat ranges, was produced in quantities that simply overwhelmed Germany's capacity to respond. Soviet T-34, production in 1944, approximately 14,648 vehicles. Germany, in the same year, produced a total of around 8,328 tanks of all types combined. Panzer IVs, Panthers, Stogis, everything. Soviet production was still nearly double. At Operation Bagration in June 1944, the massive Soviet offensive that destroyed Army Group Center, Soviet armored forces simply overwhelmed German defensive positions through mass and operational coordination. The presence of Tiger tanks in the German defense didn't change the outcome. There were too few of them, too spread out, and no amount of individual vehicle excellence could compensate for being outnumbered at every critical point. The Tiger I achieved approximately 9,850 confirmed tank kills over the course of the war, according to post-war German records and Allied confirmations. That is a real number. Those were real vehicles destroyed, real crews killed or captured. By any standard of individual combat performance, the Tiger was extraordinary, and Germany still lost, because the tanks the Tiger destroyed were replaced. The Sherman crews who died in North Africa were replaced by new crews and new tanks. The T-34s that burned in Ukraine were replaced by T-34s from factories in the Ural Mountains that German bombers couldn't reach. The Allied industrial system absorbed losses that would have been catastrophic to Germany, and kept fighting. Germany's Tigers could not be replaced at the same rate they were lost. By the last year of the war, Germany was losing tanks at a rate that its production, even at its wartime peak, could not sustain. The deficit was terminal. The Tiger program teaches something that sounds simple, but is genuinely difficult to internalize. In warfare, sufficiency at scale defeats perfection in small numbers. Almost always. The side that can absorb losses and keep fighting outlasts the side with the better individual weapons. Germany built the perfect tank and made 1,347 of them. America built a good enough tank and made 49,234. The gap between those two numbers is, in miniature, the story of why the war ended the way it did. The Tiger wasn't a failure of engineering. It was a failure of understanding what engineering is for. Next episode, Germany's jet fighter. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was flying the Me-262, the world's first operational jet-powered combat aircraft. It was 160 kilometers per hour, faster than the best Allied fighters. Its 4 30mm cannons could destroy a B-17 in a single burst. Pilots who flew against it described it as unlike anything they had encountered. Germany had a weapon that was genuinely superior in a way that production numbers couldn't easily compensate for. So why didn't it work? That story, of a weapon that might actually have changed the air war over Europe, and the decisions that ensured it didn't, is next.